So again, hello everybody. Thank you for being here. Our panel is Protecting the Planet, Sharing a Green Theology, which is a title that I like very much. My name is Silvia Francescon. I'm the director of the Environment Program of the Italian Buddhist Union. I will share with you a few thoughts and then we can start. I'm here with Valeria Termini. We have met in many circumstances, and I'm super happy to be here again with her. And Valeria is a member of the UN high level dialogue, and she will share with us many insights and concrete proposals. I was really struck by the words of Professor Melloni yesterday. I don't know if you also were there when he said that sometimes politicians look for some sort of finding in the faith leaders someone who tells them that they are right. And he was saying that everybody has his or her own role in our community. And that if we wanted to build a proper dialogue, something that we can call a true dialogue, we need to, first of all, talk about the real words. And second, not just be there to please the power. So my hope for this panel is precisely to come up with some suggestions, not to please the government. We know that this engagement group is in the run-up to the G20 summit of the leaders at the end of October. And if we can come up with some suggestions for the leaders, like concrete ones, real ones, without any fear, as an expression of courage. And I personally see the role of faith leaders as those who can pave the way, as most of the times political leaders are very busy in fixing the problem, like in the emergency. So, of course, we have said many times that the house is on fire, and they try to find the the short fixes and to have the next high-level initiative at their summit, and they have elections the next day, more or less. But for faith leaders, there is, I believe, this role of paving the way, of showing a vision. And being part of the Buddhist community, the suggestions I would like to share with you is mostly on the concept of interdependence. In the Buddhist context, there's no separation between human beings, but also the non-human beings and nature overall. So if we don't have this separation, clearly we end up in having more of an ecocentric point of view in addressing the challenges rather than the usual anthropocentric point of view. And we used to say, more eco, less ego. And the concept of interdependence is not just a philosophical one. It's a very concrete one. I'm thinking about this pandemic and COVID and many of the zoonoses that can become a pandemic. And we know that a zoonosis, 70% of the pandemics, by the way, stem from zoonosis. And these are, they come from the loss of biodiversity, deforestation, the contact with wildlife and wildlife products, international trade in wildlife, for example, and so on and so forth. So this is just a small example of what interdependence means, with all the consequences on health, on the economy, and also the emotional consequences that each of us has to go through, not to mention, of course, climate change and the impact on the human beings, migration, etc. So, though the challenge is for us as a Buddhist is, as I was mentioning before in a conversation, is to move from the meditation room and take action in the outside world, because eventually the meaning, the purpose of life is in the relationship with others. So I stop it here, and I leave it to Valeria to both tell us what she is doing in her high-level panel and also introducing our guests. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Silvia. Silvia. I may say the same. I am super happy to be here with you and with the important panelists. So I am an academic, actually, and I'm serving as a UN in the technical working groups of the UN high-level dialogue for COP26, but I still feel an academic. So let me say, protecting the planet and sharing a green theology. And in the prologue of our session, we read that environmental exploitation is an intolerable injustice. And I couldn't agree more. I will say just a couple of words. I will not until the end discuss about what we are doing at the UN, but well, let's say that the extreme events generated by the imbalance with nature, it's obvious for us, mostly related to greenhouse gases and climate change, call first of all for an issue of climate justice. And they hit poor people and weak regions harsher. This is obvious, but it's not obvious in action. We are still, the Western world has still fulfilled only the 20% of the what it committed to offer for the transition, the ecological transition of less developed countries since 2009. So it's not obvious in action, I would say. So we have just seen the poorest island, Haiti, and the richest town, New York, just struggling with extreme events. Haiti with mud, covered with mud, and New York with Hurricane Ida. But what we think actually, is that these tragedies, these events, are finally forcing politicians, both politicians and people globally, to become aware of the truth. Because we had very noisy negationists. It's not important to remember the important ones, but I mean, they were very noisy. So the idea is to share responsibility, feel the urgency of respecting nature, and even endorse principle of solidarity and human dignity. And this, as Silvia just remembered, are the values that religions have all along commonly preached, and this is green theology. But not only. Religions, I think, have the strength and the possibility, the ability to disseminate collective social messages that transcend individual faiths. So this is the most important message from the tragedies we just inherited. Now, I would like to draw the attention without using our time in introducing on two, I would say, positive issues. The first one is that what I would call cross-cultural contamination, which has to do with the interaction you mentioned, Silvia, cross-cultural contamination and new development models to protect humanity in the planet, open a window of dialogue. I would say they do, as an economist, I would say they might avoid what has been called Huntington's clash of civilizations. And so we want to have a concrete example of it. And who best than Mario Cucinella, who is a living example of cross-cultural contamination, as he's an architect, Italian architect, and founder of Building Grid Futures in Italy, but working in Ningbo, working, let me recall, in Accra, in Algeria, all over the world. I mean, so this is a fantastic example of cross-cultural contamination living in here. And I call him. And then I will have a second example, and I will, after giving the floor to the architect Mario Cucinella, that we are very happy to have here, we will repeat.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thanks for this invitation. I'm pleased to be share with you some ideas. I will take some comments from our chairman, and especially about what we can say to politicians. You know? I'm from it. If it's okay for the sound, yes. So if I make a suggestion from Italian point of view for the what I know of politicians in Italy, maybe it's time to listen people. Politicians, they talk between them, but I think they need to listen what the other people say and also understand what their desire. So I think for a long time, I'm an architect working in architecture and urban planning. For a long time, people was outside of the game, like planning cities, no, or build the buildings, no. Now this time is over. It's time to listen. And I think in the time there are too many voices, too many rumors, too many noise. It's time to listen. I think this is, you need the courage, because if you listen people, you must reply to people. You need to show in that your politics is also considering what the people ask. You know, I think this is something that I miss a lot in this country. You know, there's no dialogue, and I think sometimes politics, they are not able to get this dialogue with people, no confrontation with people. So I think after decades of contrast between us and nature, and architecture, of course, too, it's time to refine what I call a new friendship. We need to find a new friendship. We did for so many centuries. I mean, I'm architects of my time, and I look at what we did in the last, I say, 200 years. No? So we're developing so much technology, we build so much. I think for major part of the time, we need buildings, because building is culture. Building is the place where we live. We don't want to go against buildings. We need to design better building. We need to design building then creating this relation with nature, not against, but with nature, which is a new culture. It is not easy. It's not something simple, because we come from a culture of 200 years where we're pushing a lot of technology, and we discover it after many, many years. Then technology is not enough. It's not enough to make buildings. You need to do something else. You need to find the empathy. I like the word creative empathy. You need to build place with empathy. Empathy means empathy with climate, mean empathy with people, empathy with the context. But we did that for centuries. So the story of humanity is related by using resource, natural resource, and representing the social society. No? So we're missing something in the last 200 years. And now I see the discussion we have now in a new European Bauhaus. No? The question on the table of new European Bauhaus is, we need designer, architects, and artists. So I think that is an incredible point, no? So we have amazing policy. I think the only area in the world they think about social impact, the economy, the new economy, the green economy, all this issue, are really embedded in Europe, But in the end, that's not enough. Then you need the artist, designer, architect to push and create the new aesthetic, because we need a new aesthetic of these new ideas. I think this is a good point for architects. They have a very high responsibility, because I always say being an architect is a very, very dangerous work, because you can make beautiful things, also you can make a terrible nightmare. So that is the responsibility of an architect. So I think in this pandemic period, I was very surprised. Then almost debate was journalists or politicians asking to architects how you see the city of tomorrow, how you can design building after the pandemic. So architects and designers were asking a question, try to reply to a major question, how we can live together after COVID. And I think the question arises because the question was already on the table before the COVID. I think we pushing too much. We creating too much tension, too much exploring in the city. Now, then all of you remember, during the COVID, we tried to discover what you said, interconnection. We're missing the connection with nature. We're missing the connection with our friends. We're missing the connection in the public space. So we discovered that we are not only living in the city for profit. We don't live in the city only for money. We live in the city because we want to live together. For living together, you need to accept difference. You need to accept connection. We want our city of tomorrow more green, but which is, I think, the policy of major European, I see the Danish, they do a lot of work in this. European cities now working the idea that we need to live better in our city, because cities are the best place where we can live. But we need to protecting also rural area. We need to protecting area where we're creating our economy, the green economy. And I'm pleased to say that whatever there's many problems in Italy, which almost of you know, the green economy in Italy, and especially in a macroeconomy, is very, very diffuse in the territory, because we came from a agriculture country. So many differences in many areas of the city. You can see difference of product, different dialect, different culture. I feel now, everybody feel we need to defend our identity, which is is an idea of culture against globalization. We want to be different, because difference is a quality of our life. And I think that is very important. So just to finish this thing, and I was writing an article about art and architecture and fraternity, which I think I was very pleased for Alessio giving me that chance to write this article. And if you have a chance to read, you discover that art is a sensible of the society. An artist is sensitive. You know before the others what the problem are. Architects, they can build places for gathering together. We can build building to stay together. We make building for our school, our museum, is our culture. And I like to quote Edgar Morin, this anthropologist and philosopher, said, we don't forget, we are 100% nature, 100% culture. And I think with the two things like this, you can rethink in your city, you think your relationship to make the way we can live better together. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your inspiring words. Now we have the pleasure and the honor of inviting to the floor a good practice, I would say. Now we have Esben Lunde Larsen, who is Director for Faith and Sustainability based in Washington now, but his origins are from Denmark. And we have the honor of having the Minister for Environment and Food. And please, you have the floor. Having the, well, the very important inheritage from Denmark, which is maybe this with Ireland has the smallest, as we were mentioning before, the smallest proportion of carbon on GDP. So we are very proud and pleased to have you here. Thank you, Esben.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to invite you on a journey of modesty. It begins in 1908 in Sweden, where my grandmother is born. She lives through the First World War, but immigrates to Denmark just after. Here she marries my Danish-born grandfather, and together they take over our family farm just as the Great Depression hits the world. They raise their 3 kids through the Second World War and the Cold War, and experience a life in Europe where you cannot access everything material due to the geopolitical and the financial situation. In their life, they have a huge garden and a greenhouse, a vegetable garden, fruit bushes and fruit trees. They bake their own bread and ferment long before any fancy chef made that a thing. They make jam and pickles to preserve as much as possible for the winter, and they never throw out anything. Trust me, I sometimes as a kid helped clean their kitchen cabinets. They have most of their furniture during their entire life. They recycle and have very little waste. They don't heat the rooms they aren't in. And my grandmother always teach us to turn off the light in the rooms we are not in. Not because they are poor, quite the contrary, but because there is no need for it. They have money, but not money to burn, and their identity is not in their consumption, but in their being. And in that sense, their life is a journey of modesty. In my world, my grandmother was really the first champion of sustainable living, long before it became a buzzword and a thing smart consultants could earn a fortune on. She protected the planet with her modest living and reasonable living. And we have much to learn from that today. In Denmark today, with our consumption, we use as much resources, so it would be necessary to have 3 planet Earth if it was on a global scale. See, protecting the planet, sharing a green theology is very much a moral impetus for today's world, for you and for me. And faith-based organizations can be front and center of this. No faith nor religion has intellectual property rights on a green theology. And the beauty of that is really that all faith-based organizations and religions can push for it together with an audience of 81% of this planet's population that identify with a faith. A green theology must focus on the care for creation, on sustainability for people and planet, for a just transition, where resources are more equally distributed, but also used with more care. And this challenge is only growing with us being 10 billion people on the planet in 2050. We do not need to be the pot calling the kettle black. We need to live as role models. That is why a green theology must engage the faith-based organizations, not only from the pulpit, but with their own assets, reducing emissions from faith-owned buildings, transforming land owned by faith-based organization into sustainable land use, change the transportation and energy consumption, and lower food waste in faith-owned institutions. Just one example. Today we waste 1/3 of all food, and if food waste was a country, it would be the 3rd largest emitter of CO2 in the world. Faith leaders need to walk the talk with their followers. And on that journey, we need a starting point, a baseline, so to speak, so we know what we emit, how much we impact the planet with our behavior. That is why we at the World Resources Institute in Washington, D.C. has developed science-based targets for faith, just as we have done for businesses, where more than 80% of Fortune 500 businesses today use science-based targets to deliver with their assets on the Paris Climate Agreement. Science-based targets for faith is an easy and user-friendly methodology where religions and faith-based organizations or followers of faith can register their emissions from buildings or land use, transportation or energy consumption, make a plan for how to lower it, and engage followers in this in compliance with the Paris Climate Accord. Making an emission baseline is really the beginning of a journey of modest living. If faith-based organizations or religions want to appeal to the political level at the G20 and signal that it is time to heal, and I indeed think that is necessary, faith-based organizations and religions need to show with their own assets and actions that a green theology is not only words on papers or lectures from the pulpit, but actions invested in. Actions that can show the political level that it is possible to change, that the followers of faith are willing to change, and that government should support faith-based organizations in this when they plan policies, recovery packages, and climate initiatives. But also have politicians to understand an important point, that if a country today wants to deliver on its climate obligation in accordance with the Paris Climate Accord, it needs faith-based organizations and religions in that particular country to take action with their own assets along the government. So dear interfaith environments, let us not be late to the party. You are indeed well positioned to weather the storm and to show not only the G20, but the world that you're capable of changing your own behavior with your own assets, and through that be an example for the political world to follow, to show that a green theology is closely connected with liberation theology that considers environmental exploitation as an intolerable injustice towards mankind. My grandmother was never a model. She was a farmer's wife, but she was a role model. We have the chance to be the same. Thank you very much.
We should have a guest from US. Should we see in the video or? Okay. Xiaofeng Tang, Vice Director of the World Religion Research Institute. Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you very, very well. Thank you for being with us. What
Yeah,
time is
you're right.
it, in your place?
Okay.
What time is it there?
Yeah. Could I start?
说现在中国是什么时间？
Oh, it's I think it's 9.
Almost
It's
10
10 o'clock.
p.m.
So thank you so much for being with us. You are the Vice Director of the World Religion Research Institute and the Direction for Christianity. Please.
Okay.
The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Good afternoon, everyone. I think what I'm about to discuss will be a bit off topic, but it's still my honor here to share my opinions about the topic of what kind of Christian theology the Chinese church needs. In the Chinese context, before we discuss about the ecological theology or green theology, I think there are several issues that must first be paid attention to and thought about. One of them is what kind of theology the Chinese church needs. Although Christianity has a history of more than 200 years in China, the tension between this kind of foreign faith and Chinese culture is still obvious. Constructing an indigenous theology that conforms to Chinese context is particularly crucial to dissolving this tension. Chinese philosophy and culture emphasize a harmonious relationship between humankind and nature. In the Chinese theology constructed in this way is naturally ecological and green. If we go beyond the category of Christian faith itself and focus on Chinese culture and society as a whole, I think Christian theology needs to highlight the following characteristics in Chinese context: inclusiveness, ethics, spirituality, syncretization. The first one, inclusiveness. Chinese traditional culture emphasizes inclusiveness and coexistence. This is a common characteristic of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. The doctrine of the mean says that Tao runs side by side without contradiction. Everything grew together without harming each other. The analytic says that under the sky, the humankind are brothers. Tao Te Ching said that inclusive leads to fulfillment. Buddhism emphasizes tolerance without doubt. In contrast, the exclusiveness brought about by the strict monotheism is very obvious in current Chinese Christian circle. How to adhere to monotheistic beliefs on the one hand and meet the inclusive characteristics of traditional Chinese culture on the other hand is a very difficult problem that Chinese Christian theology needs to solve. And it's also the premise and the basis of ecological theology in China. The second characteristic is ethics. One of the most important characteristics of Chinese traditional culture is the emphasis on the harmonious relationship between human and human, human and nature, human and society, and human and heaven. This harmonious relationship is finally implemented into specific human ethics. In relation to this, Chinese religious thoughts are always expressed as human-centered, and in many cases, they have the function of moral education. Some modern Chinese theologians, such as T. Xizhao, have discussed a lot on these characteristics. After the founding of People's Republic of China, Bishop Ding Guangxun also emphasizes that God is love, Christ of the universe, and other relevant thoughts in this way. Chinese theology should be further explored in this direction. This harmonious relationship is also the entrance point of Chinese ecological theology. The third characteristic is spirituality. When Jesus spread his gospel of kingdom of heaven, Christianity as an institutional Christian organization did not come into form yet. This did not happen until the end of the 1st century. The name Christianity appeared for the first time after 115 AD. The rigorous church system on the one hand was inherited from the Jewish synagogue system. On the other hand, it was inseparable from the cultural influence of the Roman world. The so-called congregations, missionaries, were mostly formed in European and American countries, appeared to Western Latin churches. Eastern Christian sects paid more attention to ritual and individual spirituality, which is determined by the characteristics of Eastern culture. At present, Chinese Christian theology has not discussed spirituality systematically, emphasizing the meditation and spiritual practice of individuals is undoubtedly consistent with the essence of ecological theology. The fourth characteristic, syncretization. Christians often think that their beliefs are international and Christianity is a universal religion. However, as a premise, internationality and universality must be localized and contextualized. In addition to the definition of culture, localization also has a limitation of the country and nation. This is also a necessary condition that cannot be avoided in the spread of Christianity at any time. And these conditions in turn has an influence on the existence of Christianity. The emergence of Christianity is a product of the changes of the age 2000 years ago, and it also corresponds to the development of that time. The conversion of the Goths in Western Europe, the Christianization of European countries, the baptism of the Slavic peoples, the popular theology of Korea, and the liberation theology of South America also confirm to the relationship between the development of Christianity and the changes of the times. This is a choice Christianity must be faced, either transforming actively, adapting to the development of the times, and becoming an organic part of the specific situation, or becoming an obstacle to the development of the times and disappearing on the stage of history. To express its faith based on the overall interests of the country and the nation is the most fundamental requirement for the synthesization of Christianity. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much to Xiaofeng Tang for your intervention. Now we shift to a different point, which is, well, we mentioned cross-cultural contamination and the role of religions and of faiths on it. Now, on the other hand, we economists, I would say we are writing bits and pieces of a new theory of sustainable development. And well, kind of showing that the trade-off between economic growth and environment may not hold anymore. So, of course, to abandon fossil fuels and use natural resources is a very important and essential step. However, it is certainly not enough. We have to implement the ecological transition, and sustainable growth implies new thought, I would say, new theory. And here we are happy and enough to have the contribution by Gael Giraud, who honored us of his presence. He now teaches at Georgetown University. He's a French economist, a well-known French economist, and is fellow of the International Energy Agency, director of research at CNRS, a lot of other things also that I'm not mentioned, but he wrote a book on transizione ecologica, ecological transition in 2015, who was the winner of the Prix Lycée du Livre Économique. So thank you very much for being here with us, and as an economist, share your views.
Thank you, grazie per l'invitazione. Buona giornata a tutti. Thank you for the invitation. Maybe I should add also that I'm also priest, Catholic priest and Jesuit. Maybe I should add that I'm also a priest, Catholic priest and a Jesuit. So I'm going to talk as both as an economist and a priest and a Jesuit. Maybe the first thing I want to emphasize is that I completely agree with what you said and what you said earlier, namely the fact that we here are, as faith leaders, it seems to me our job is to provide the G20 with a strong call for action. I mean, interreligious dialogue is fine, but if we don't end up with a concrete recommendation, similar to the one that was made by Esben a little bit earlier, then we are not doing our job, it seems to me. So the question I would ask ourselves today is, what kind of strong call for action could we make today to the G20? It happens that I'm just coming back from Marseille in the south of France, where we had the UICN, you know, the big international congress of the United Nations devoted to biodiversity, protection of biodiversity. And to be honest with you, it seems to me nobody knows how to protect biodiversity. That's a big challenge today. At the same time, we have another big challenge, which is hunger and food security. And as you probably know, I mean, food security is not secured, is not ensured in big regions, even in sub-Saharan Africa in the next 25 years. It turns out that there is one way to address both big challenges, biodiversity protection on the one hand, food security on the other hand, by promoting the same issue, the same project, which is agroecology. Agroecology is a way to convert our agriculture in such a way that is respectuous both of wild and domestic biodiversity, and which provides food for everybody, or should provide food for everybody. And I do believe this is one thing we could try to promote here as faith leaders, that is the conversion of agriculture into agroecology at the world level. It turns out that at Georgetown University, in the Environmental Justice program that I just founded, we are studying the impact of such a big change at the world level using quantitative models that combine both macroeconomics, climate models, and models of natural resources. Because in order to have a vision of what's going on in the future, you need to combine both aspects, natural resources, and you know that a number of minerals, for instance, are going to be very scarce, and we need them for the energy transition. Obviously, the climate change issue, and obviously microeconomics. Just one example of a hint, of an output that we get from this work already is that Indonesia, where we are going to have our next big meeting next year, Indonesia, if we don't do anything, will be just uninhabitable somewhere in the second half of this century. Why? Because Indonesia, whatever the way you understand the impact of climate change, will just be a martyr country. If you take the rise of the sea level, and you know that they changed already the capital city, Jakarta is not the capital city anymore. You take peaks of heat and humidity, you take lack of drinkable water, typhoons whose frequency and severity is just going to increase, seismic activity, volcano activity, etc., etc. So Indonesia is a very, very specific country on which we should focus. If there is a place today where environmental justice makes sense, that's Indonesia. And that's also the most numerous Muslim nation in the world. So the geopolitical aspect of Indonesia today, being a multi-climate country, is huge. So this is just to give you an example of the kind of, recommendation that we can have with a broad picture, which is science-based in the same way as Esben was mentioning for WRI. But now let me just mention what is the main obstacle for the conversion at the world level of agriculture into agroecology. And from my viewpoint, the answer is debt, the overhang of private debt from small peasants. As you know, those who are feeding the planet today are not the big agro-industries, but small peasants. Many of them have too much debt. And you may know, for instance, that in India, every minute on average, there are 28 peasants who commit suicide because they can't pay the debt. So since we already began our meeting this afternoon, more than 100 Indian peasants committed suicide because they can't pay back their debt. In the US, to give another example, in the US, the private debt of farmers is higher than $500 billion. So that's not a small amount of money. How can we help these people be saved from this debt overhang and at the same time transit and going to agroecology? One solution is, to organize a swap of the debt for nature. That is, you forgive part of the debt and you tell to the peasants, well, with the money you have saved, thanks to the forgiveness of your debt, you are going to invest into agroecology. This the World Bank did 20 years ago in a number of situations. And the point today would be to duplicate that at the world level, focused on peasants for agroecology. It might seem a very small and marginal topic, but actually, if you think of it, since it addresses both the issue of biodiversity and food security, it's a key element in the solution, it seems to me. Now, this is where faith leaders enter the picture, because many of these peasants, they have debt towards the informal sector. So you can't, at the world, you can't have a top-down process where governments would talk to the banking system, telling them, you should forgive debts, because this is just impossible. So you need people on the ground, on the field, talking to the peasants, talking to the informal banking sector and saying, look, we have a good idea. You should just forgive the debt in order yourself to be able to survive. Because if these peasants turn into agroecology, we have some chance to survive the next century. It's as simple as that, In addition to that, it's not just the issue for us faith leaders to give good advices, but we could also give good examples. So it turns out that the Catholic Church is probably the first landowner in the US and in many other countries. So the Catholic Church could start by giving the good example and implement concretely on the land where it is the owner techniques of agriculture, of perma-agriculture, or agroecology, in order to show to the rest of the world and to show to the society where it is that we can do it, and that this is also a fruitful win-win strategy both for the biodiversity and food security. And my opinion is that on this issue, sisters, female religious congregations should play a big role on the field. That's why Esben also has an initiative trying to foster female religious congregations on the ground to help them help people. So this is a concrete call for action for the G20 that we could all endorse. And even from a Buddhist viewpoint, the empathy towards your other human beings and the empathy toward non-human beings, as you said rightly, is the same empathy, the same kind of empathy. And if you want to implement concretely agroecology on a day-to-day basis, you need to feel this experience, this spiritual experience, that mosquitoes are as important as human beings. But by doing agroecology, you honor both aspects at the same time. And as I said, this is a win-win strategy. Thank you.
Comment from my side now is, looks like sometimes we are undergoing an ecological transition without the ecology. Much of the attention is on the energy transition, and rightly so, in the sense that it is a big proportion of the emissions, but climate change is just the tip of an iceberg, I think. And it is the result of a system that goes toward that direction. And going back again to the proper words that we should use, have you noticed that in some international context, the word biodiversity is kind of missing today? We tend to substitute the word biodiversity with other words. And I think we need also to reappropriate our proper language. because biodiversity, as much as diversity between people, culture, is at the basis of the community. And I think that one of the lessons I take from today is also the word of community. We have different words in religions, Sangha and different words, but the community is the point, the working together. And we were talking with Valeria, we would like to end up this session with picking, and we will work together later, some of the key messages that you have sent, including a message for ourselves. As you said, you know, our behavior matters, to give to Professor Melloni, so that we can try to have as much of an impact as possible. Valeria.
Yes, thank you. Okay, Silvia already said what is our intent, so we will ask you a few words, but before the end, I will ask the gentleman there to say a word from the Islamic point of view. You said, just in 1 second, I'm finished and then I go on your back. But meanwhile, you prepare a few words that you consider a key message from your talk, so we can collect them. On the other hand, from an economist point of view, one of the words that kind of strike me most is the obstacle of debt that Gael mentioned. And here I can feel what we are trying to do with the UN, which is consider a policy, climate policies, but to bridge the gap between rich countries and more needed, I mean, less developed, let's call it correctly, less developed countries. So one of the proposals that you mentioned at the beginning I made and was accepted by the scientific technical working group is the idea of a global carbon tax. And the idea is global because it must be global. Then the implementation should be and will be national, but what can be a national? We don't have nationalist answers to problems like climate change and COVID. So the idea is to have a global, trying to have a global carbon tax in order to feed a fair transition fund. We already have a fair transition fund globally, but it's almost empty. So the idea is to use Glasgow and the COP26 in order to benefit from this possible way of bridging these gaps. But that's too much. This is enough. Thank you. I don't really know your name, but since we okay, thank you, Ibrahim and David.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. In fact, I thought Professor Melloni just, but it was very tight program. I have given a talk, another program. I am a Muslim environmentalist, and I was a team of preparing declaration for climate change in 2015 with the UNEP. Then we are assigned to have another document, major document for Muslim societies around the world. It's called El Mizan, a covenant for the earth. It is the first document. It will be the first document with the with the UNEP we prepared, and it will be submitted to UN this fall. We sent the draft of this document to 250 Muslim institutions and communities around the world, and to just have a common voice, a support of all Muslim communities. All groups, all voices is heard. We have our team is 8 people, scholars and activists, and 2 ladies. And El Mizan presents an Islamic outlook of the environment to a bit of strength to strengthen local, regional, and international actions that combat climate change and other threats to the planet. It is a global endeavor to engage Islamic scholars and Muslim institutions in the development and adoption of this call. We also sent our document, like Laudato Si, to all other members of other faiths. We have very creative, critical, and inspiring feedbacks from our other environmentalist colleagues. I just want to share this good news with you, and it will be a major document to raise awareness in the Muslim societies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This is so important. And actually, I would like to ask you, Ibrahim, if you do have a link for us, we can, I don't know if there is a website or of the declaration that you have adopted. Thank you. That would be so important. And thank you so much. Maybe if you want, we still have a little bit of time. And in order to do what we wanted to do, to take action, if you can tell us like the keywords you would like us as a chair that we work later to convey to Professor Melloni. Thank you. So if you want to maybe go in the opposite, yeah, starting from you. Yeah, you can. Yeah.
You have one.
Oh, that's
okay. Very briefly, if you want to support the idea of a worldwide carbon tax, which I think is a very good idea, even though I didn't mention it, the carbon tax, you must refer, I think, on the Stern-Stiglitz report that has been launched by the World Bank in 2017, written by a high-level panel of economists. I was a member of this panel with Nicholas Stern and Joe Stiglitz, dedicated to the carbon tax, where we provide all the arguments, the economic arguments, explaining that that's the best tool you can think of in order to provide money for the state and to provide good incentives for decarbonization of the economy. You will face a number of resistances that I'm facing because of the yellow vest in France. But being French, I can tell you this is a wrong argument. The very fact that we had yellow vest protesting against the carbon tax has nothing to do with the carbon tax, but with the tax unfairness of what the French government did at this time. So there is plenty of room in order to implement a carbon tax, supporting and helping poor people who are trapped by the carbon tax. And of course they are. So we need to help them face the carbon tax while wealthy companies and people can face the carbon tax and pay for it, I believe.
I think my key message would really be what get measured, get managed, and that we need to measure what impact faith-based organizations have on the environment to walk the talk. And in collaboration with national governments, see to that the emissions as part of a green theology really also is part of the national inventory for the countries when they deliver on the Paris Climate Agreements. Because, for example, in the US, where the Catholic Church owns 100,000 buildings, it's a huge impact. And if the US government wants to reach its goals, as the president has signaled, he needs the faith-based organizations to take these kinds of actions. And I think the other aspect is really the focus on how we spend our resources. Gael Giraud was building or touching on it, how the resources are changing in the world when we will lower our carbon use, how we see water scarcity and so on. And these changes in resource allocation will have a huge impact on where we need to take action to support the poorest people in creating a just transition. So that's also a very, very important obstacle to come over and be mindful about.
Resource allocation is also always a sign of political will. Basically, politicians, what they have to do is basically to say where they want to allocate resources. So please.
Yes, I say, like we said in the beginning, rethinking cities in relation with human and nature, which I think is one of the goals of the European roadmap. And I think also just to know then the building sector producing 40% of CO2 emissions. So I think if you don't have action in building sector, it'd be difficult to reduce the gap. So working to reduce the emissions also with the sample technology doesn't mean we need to fool the building technology. It is also about some simplicity, how to make building for people living better. And I say in Laudato Si, the Pope talk about the building poverty. So it's the economic poverty, it's the food poverty, but also building poverty. So I think we need to really focus how with sustainability make better life for the poor who are living in poor buildings. I remember maybe years ago in 2003 or 4, the heat wave in Europe was one of the most dramatic climate change, with a lot of people died. And who died? The poor people living in the poor buildings. So I think we need to focus not only on the happy city that we always see, but we need to focus also then sustainability will be the first step of welfare. If people living better in buildings, the life is better for all. So I think that is the message, if I will be straightforward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This goes very much along with what we are saying about social inclusion and what Valeria was saying about social injustice as well. So thank you so much. Valeria, would you like to add? Okay, so thank you so much, everybody, for having been here, for having listened to us. As we said before, the first point is always listening, right? And is the basis of a dialogue. So thank you so much. And what we can say and promise is that we will deliver what we have delivered today. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.